I'm going to show you two different projects today, Windows and web. The first step is to open the Status Vision Designer, which is the application you see here, and select File, New Project. Once you select New Project, you'll see the two project types, either web or Windows. I'm going to start with a Windows C# application. You can change the name and file location. I'm going to leave everything as default and hit OK. When I hit OK, you can see the project is building, and you can see on the right hand side the project tab is populated with a project tree. Double click on the main page.saml. This is going to bring up your design surface. With the design surface, this is where you design all your screens. You can add multiple pages, etc. So to get started, go into the toolbox tab here and select gauge, dual gauge. I'm going to left click and draw that out, and then for an LED I'm going to just simply left click and hold and drag and drop from the toolbox. So there's a couple ways you can bring controls on the design surface, either by selecting and then left click and drawing out, or drag and drop. To bring in the data source, go to the menu Data Sources and select from one of the options. You can bring in an ODBC data source, a SQL data source, or an OPC data source. We also provide custom data sources as well to talk to things like web services or something like Wi-Fi sensors. So if I select OPC, now we support all types of OPC. In this example, I'm going to use the DA data source. Once you select DA, a new dialog will appear. Select Add. And when you select Add, you have two options. You can either bring from the local machine or across the network. I'm going to use a local server and select Matricon and hit OK. All these fields here you can change. I'm going to leave them just as default and hit Apply. And hit Close. You can see everything being populated in the left-hand panel called the Data Binding panel. I'm going to select the dual gauge first, and I'm just going to start browsing the items. Now, one important note here is you can bring in multiple data sources into your project. If I had more than one, I could select this drop down and pick the data source I want. So I'm browsing through the data source tree, and I'm going to select random and go to a tag int1 value and hit apply. That's going to get the binding. I'm going to go to the LED and select int4 value and hit apply. Now notice these are all one-way bindings. Status also will support two-way bindings, which will send values back to the server and then to the various pieces of equipment on the floor. Now you can see the gauge kind of grayed out here, and that lets the user know that the values coming back from the server has exceeded the range of the control. So if I go into the properties here and just change the maximum property for this gauge, I won't have that problem. Now all these controls are highly customizable, so you can change all the background colors, needles, the shapes, so all of this can be catered towards your look and feel. Once I have the data bindings in place, I'm going to select the green triangle up here, which is my test run, and just make sure all my data bindings are working. Next step, I'm going to do a build and run, and when I do a build and run, that's going to launch our Status Client software. And what the Status Client software does is it loads all of our Windows projects and makes them available to the user. Now it's going to open up in a window mode. If I double click, it's going to be full screen. Hit escape, brings it back down. This little bar up here up top, we provide security, so we use the Active Directory. So if you're on a network, you can start telling the Status Client which controls you want users to see. Now let's show you the web side of things. File, New Project. Now I'm going to select a web application, and again everything else I'm going to just leave as default. I'm going to go through the same steps. You can see the project tree being developed here on the right. The project is building. Once it's done building, I'm going to double click on the main page.xaml, bring up my design surface. Now one thing you have to do inside of a web application is all the data sources need to go through the status server. And the status server can be found on the status management console, which is another application that can be installed. Now all the status server is doing is just making the communication to your data sources, so it's more or less acting as a proxy to get across any DCOM issues or jump networks. First step is select the status server tab and hit connect, and select new data source, and you'll be presented with the same options you were just presented in the Windows application. So I'm going to select the DA data source and go through the same steps here. Go through add, local, select my server, hit OK, apply, and close. One final step, you need to make sure you hit apply here in the bottom right. I'm going to jump back into the designer now. Go into toolbox and drag some more controls out here. So this example, I'll use a water tank and maybe a variance label, and go to my data source menu. Now you only see two options here, so I'm going to go through status server, real-time data, hit add. Now this address here, this is the address of my local machine, so that would be the machine that's running your status management console or the status server. Go ahead and drop down server node and pick the server I want to bind to, and hit apply and close. And now everything is the same thing. We're just going to browse the tree and find the tag we want, and hit apply. Same thing with this other control here. Hit apply, pop into test mode. All that is working the same way. You can see that control grayed out, so I could change that, change the maximum here, and now do a build and run. Now one thing that you're going to notice right off the bat is there's no status client when you're doing a web application. It's going to launch your browser, it's going to use your local default browser, and it's going to host it on the web. How you would deploy this application is you would take this project and then host that on your web server, and then whoever had access to the link would be able to see your real-time data.